So, John MacKay, you gave a presentation on extraction yesterday at the conference,
Yes.
and you started by asking everybody how many of you do extraction, and like 3 people raised their hands. And then what was the next comment you made?
The next comment I was making was more of saying, why would you possibly want to do that? So the presentation was about whether you build up your own extraction company or whether you do in-house. So,
But wait, both those are the, if you build,
is that redundant?
Or if you outsource.
Oh, I'd have to do the and/or. So the seminar was about whether you do in-house extraction or whether you outsource. So that would be 2 different choices that aren't the same, correct? And so if I went back through, it was easily as informative and confusing as that statement. But the part that's important is with the number of people that are now into the industry and the number of people that are looking to be totally vertical is very different from 2017, or 2016 for sure. Back to 2013 and before that, there were probably just 3 or 4 vendors. There were 4 or 5 different ways to do extraction. Most of them came from what I would call the cottage industry, and it was a very, very different world. And now, as you move towards the hemp world, which is significantly different, enormous numbers of crops.
The scale and the scope of
the scale and the scope. Nobody
300-acre hemp farm extraction.
Yes. Oh, 300 is a small one, so some of the people that I'm working with now are moving to 7,000 even here in the United States, and so there was no one doing 7,000 of Bubba Kush.
So how about give me like a per 1,000 acre, what's the volume of biomass?
Oh my gosh.
Or per acre?
Yeah, so if I was to go back through it, I'll backtrack another way, and that is the entire flow, no matter what the yield would be from an acre, is, and the reason I wouldn't give that answer is because there's a number of different percentages. Up in Canada, it's a very low percentage. In Europe, it's a lower percentage. Here in the United States, people have got varieties that are 20% CBD, for example. Call it CBDA because it's not CBD. And then, but they're also doing some 1-to-1 CBD to CBC, and they're in 1-to-1 of CBD to THCV. And at the same time, they've been able to take out the THC. So now you have no THC or very little THC.
Just quickly, when you mentioned Canada versus, let's say, in California, when you said Canada is low yielding or low what?
So they within their laws and stuff, they're less than the 2% many times of the hemp that they're making. So they have to be able to extract, real hemp that's low percentage.
THC.
CBD.
You mean they have a cap on the amount of CBD that they can?
My understanding, so I don't want to give
insane.
misinformation, but at the same time, anyone I've talked to up there, it's a very low amount of CBDA that they're trying to get out of the plants that they're growing.
That they're allowed to do.
Yeah, I would fact check that.
Okay, I will definitely fact check it, but I find that interesting. So in Canada, they're breeding genetics that basically have a low yield of anything, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely low THC because that's a requirement,
yes, right.
And then low CBD, which pretty much everybody who's growing hemp in North America right now is for isolate and extraction. Is that kind of?
That is true.
Like nobody's making it for clothing or
very
paper.
Few, but there are a lot of people that are doing it. So you'll find people that are growing some of the agricultural ones with the long stalks, but because when people have to make that decisions on how they're going to use their land currently with the CBD being at such a high, price, then they're making the choice between should I make $1,000 an acre or should I make $100,000 an acre. The numbers are pretty, drive you towards the CBD.
Right. So you're the guy who comes in at the tail end of the whole process, which is the extraction, but it seems like you would have a say in the conversation around what varietals or cultivars, what hemp cultivators are cultivating. So can you talk about kind of what you're seeing out there? Because I feel like hemp cultivars are so new in North America that nobody has like a 10-year track record with I've been growing this type and it's a high yielding this, that, or the other. So what's going on from a planting different cultivars and seeing what is the most prolific in terms of extraction or other end purposes.
So it's really interesting on some of the things that I've learned to the industry, especially over the last 3 years with the hemp. Because before that, I didn't pay much attention. Probably most people didn't. But when you're looking at it now, it's growing a cultivar that is regionally specific, and growing a cultivar that people understand how to transport the plants to wherever they're going to. The education,
you mean from propagation to the field?
From propagation to the field.
Okay.
And then also the number of people that are experts at being able to know how you plant it and when you plant it. I also see the farming equipment coming in so that they're planting those. The other part is when I go to the first crop, so there's people I know that are wanting to grow 7,000 acres. And I'm always telling them.
And where are they growing that?
They're growing it California, New Mexico, Colorado, and you go back through and Kentucky, and you go back through and you bring them back to 25 or 300 acres, and you will see the difference as it moves to their first crop of things that are small, things that are big, the plants that are high, the plants that just die. And so the first year is to figure out, oh my gosh, hemp is very sensitive to where it's growing. You can have one that's 3 feet tall and one that's 12 feet tall, because that's where you figure out where the best soil is, or whatever happened, or something gets flooded out or something gets dried out. So in Kentucky, for example, the filtration, the way their land is, it filters very, very clean water, but it filters very quickly through that. In Oregon, I've seen stuff that's clay. I could practically make pottery out of what they're growing it in. And then, so each one is so widely different, and each one has to be variety different, so you can't just buy seeds online like I'm going to grow big boy tomatoes versus the small ones.
So can you give some examples of some, are we calling them varietals or cultivars?
Cultivars is probably better.
So can you give some examples of some cultivars that you're seeing that people are starting to dominate the market in certain markets to sort of be consistent with the fact that the different microclimates are conducive to different cultivars?
So I'll start with a quick one. The quick answer is no, I can't.
Okay.
The second answer is I could kill a plastic plant. So I've been staying in my lane as far as the swim lane. Whatever they have for a cultivar that's out there, then my extraction will be towards what they're trying to get out of that. But I've really stayed out of that side.
So now let's move on to the extraction side. And I'm sticking with hemp because I think it's something new and different and interesting the market. So talk to me about, like, you have a facility in Oakland that for cannabis, you have all this different extraction equipment for different types of extraction. So ethanol, CO2, you're not doing butane. We can talk about that later. But for hemp, are you in that game? Like
I am in that game.
Out of that same Oakland facility?
Yes.
Okay. So you can bring in both cannabis and hemp?
Yes.
Into the same facility?
Yes.
Okay. So what's going on in the hemp world? Are you starting... This is your first year in operation, so let's fast forward to the end of the year.
Okay.
When harvest season is upon us, you're going to get like this much cannabis and this much hemp.
Yes.
And so are you ready for massive quantities of hemp? And what are the conversations you're having with hemp cultivators?
It's a great question. So these are the situations I have currently. So I have a facility that I would call I won't call it it's a strip mall, Sears and Roebuck. It's a strip mall store. And in that, I'm able to show the smaller components of how to do each type of extraction. So ethanol at different temperatures, -40, -20, room temperature. Also being able to do refrigerant 134A, which is, totally legal. It's tetrafluoroethane, so that has its own different extraction characteristics. A number of different types of CO2 plus ethanol, CO2 plus terpenes, different ways of doing the CO2. And then also another way that we've been doing it is with modulated cavitation. So modulated cavitation is a process where you take the material, mix it with a solvent that's either ethanol or water or a combination of the two, and you bring it through down to a quarter inch, so I grind it down to a quarter inch. Then I bring it through a rotor that allows me to do flow-through cavitation, and I can be able to modulate how much cavitation I'm providing, shock wave. And then from there, I have post-processing. So how does it work? Analogy for this is a garden. So if I have a garden and I go to the spigot, I get a bucket of water, I bring it back to the garden, I put it on the garden, I go back, get another bucket of water, pour it on the garden. So that's what I've done. And that's continuous batch. Batch can be slower, but what I've developed is they, them. What we developed with another company out of Rome, Georgia, is a hose. So now it's more of taking that as a continuous flow. So on that side, being able to do, on a small side, say 12 pounds a minute on a very small footprint. Now the small footprint means that I've still got to feed that beast. So I'm doing it in Oakland, Oregon, New Mexico, Southern Cal, where I have larger facilities. It would be a remote refinery. So my Oakland facility would allow me to show how it works and then bring it out to a much larger facility where I can do 120 pounds a minute.
So Oakland's almost like a showroom?
It's almost like a little strip mall showroom.
Okay.
But I'm still able to get great yields out of there. And so that's where I'm doing that. I'm also doing refining there for pesticide remediation, as well as stripping THC out of hemp processes.
Okay. So with the hemp farmers, companies, brands that you're talking to, like, what are the questions they're peppering you with when it comes to extraction?
It's interesting because the farmers everyone's swimming in their lane. Everyone's staying there. I feel like if I'm in lane number 3, I have lane 2 and 1 next to me, and I have 4 and 5 on the other side. Sometimes I think lane 5 has a shark, but other than that, Richard Dreyfuss, I'm just waiting to go out on the boat.
Right.
But when I'm going back through, their questions are, I've got this material. How do I prepare it for any type of extraction? A lot of times you'll have the big grows in there saying, well, I'd love to do ethanol. And if you go back and look,
we're talking big hemp grows, or
big
just
hemp grows,
okay.
And you go back through and you start to do the math for them, and they realize that they're going to need a 22,000 gallon ethanol tank outside to support what they believe they're going to be doing. So that's the other part.
This is a scenario where they'd want to do it on site,
or they have their own refinery that they want to do at their place. Yes.
Okay, so they're asking you questions about building out their own refinery.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's amazing the number of people that will grow, and then halfway through their grow realizing that they've got to extract it.
Right.
So, and then where do you bring it? So some of the things that we talked about yesterday, even during the presentation, was, do you grow your own, or do you find a place that's outsourced that you can bring your material to, that you feel confident that they will provide you the extraction that you need?
And for hemp cultivators, are those facilities are reliable facilities popping up around the country to process?
There's reliable business models that are popping up around the country, and some of them are really making them. So I would say that if you had 4 or 5 in Kentucky, that would be a good thing, because you need one in Lexington, you need one in Pulaski, you need one in Louisville, because of the number of people growing. If I was in Oregon, I'd have one in Medford, Salem, Portland. So the number of people that are in Bend, see the number of places that are growing the major ones to have a refinery. If I was saying that there was one business model that's out there right now that would be the most profitable, I would start to build local refineries.
For hemp processing, or just for anything?
For hemp processing,
Okay.
because once you... So when I go back to when I look at hemp, so cannabis has, type 1, type 2, type 3, and a lot of people are starting to adopt that. So type 1 would be high THC, low CBD. Type 2 would be, 1-to-1, and type 3 would be a high CBD, low THC. So the plants are the same as far as what an extractor sees. If I have the different types of oranges, I don't really care. It's a different flavor.
So for you, from the extraction side, it doesn't matter whether it's hemp, whether it's high THC cannabis. The machine looks at it the same way.
The machine has no idea.
Right.
So a car has no idea who the driver is.
Right.
Same thing. And you can have different types of cars. So you have a Miata, you have a 2-seater, a 4-seater, you have a SUV, and you have a bus.
Right.
And if they're all going from Los Las Vegas to LA and they're all at the same speed, then they're all going to get there at the same time. But it's only the difference in the number of people that are in it, and that's a yield type of thing.
Right. Okay. Like what are some other? So it seems like with the hemp world, one of the major things is just the sheer scale of the amount of biomaterial all these farms are going to have. It's not the same as a 1 acre cannabis farm.
No.
So the equipment, is it just literally like you said for the ethanol, it's getting a 22,000 gallon, stainless steel
tank for the outside.
Right.
Yeah. To be able to do that. So there's a number of companies out there that already do large scale processing for the botanical materials, and I would say hops is a botanical material.
Right.
And so
the beer industry uses a ton of it.
Uses a ton and tons of it. And so there's extractors up in Yakima that look like a Saturn, 3 rocket, for gosh sakes. I mean, and they have the processes down. They make pellets. They do this. They do that. So they have that process down. So when we were doing, cannabis on the Type 1, we didn't. If anyone had that much material, that would be amazing. That would solve have the whole world's amount of THC in one day.
Right.
But with hemp, and with the use of CBD in so many products and so many box stores now, it's the extraction side allows you to have something that will provide a quality product every time. But the thing that is most important for people to judge, and that is what are their clean in place? How are they doing? What's the cleaning validation? How do I know that the person before me didn't run pesticides and somewhere in your tubing? So all those things, when you have an outsource, that's a great idea for monetary, but you also have to ask them lots and lots of questions about the cleaning and what their cleaning validation is and how they're doing that.
So that actually raises a good point. Can you give, in addition to that, a couple other questions that someone bringing raw material to an extraction facility should ask?
Ah, that's great. So number one, they should ask about the cleaning validation. So that's one. The other one is to be able to meet with the chemical engineers and the chemists that know how to do the processing on the extraction side and the post-processing on the backside. So if you're doing a ton of material or a couple tons of material, extracting's almost the easiest part. The second part is how you're getting rid of the ethanol, because I've seen a number of companies all across the world that will take a low THC, less than the 0.3, 0.1, and by the time they're done processing, it can be 5%. And the reason it's 5% is because when you do a processing with CBDA, and you do it with ethanol or that sort of processing, you have such a high conversion over to delta 9. So when you look at the molecule itself, it will convert very quickly from CBDA to THC through a couple number of steps. But even through a couple number of steps, you might have 48% CBD and 10% THC. Well, you're well over the limit, and you made it yourself. So you want to ask about, how are they doing that on a small scale, and what's going to happen on a large scale, and put it into the contract that if they chemically convert it, that you want to have a way of reciprocity or something that allows you to go and do that. So I would say, what do they know about thermodynamics? What do they know about mass transfer? What do they know about the entire process is critical.
So actually on that topic, what's the legality around I bring my harvest to the processor and it's below the 0.03%?
0.3.
It's below the 0.3%, and they give me a final product that's above it. Is there any way to water it down, like, so to speak, or like or do I just lose it, because now it's illegal? Like, I can't make a hemp or a CBD product that I can sell nationally. So,
or even locally.
So what's my recourse? How do I salvage it?
So they should have processes in place that when it goes over, that they know how to bring it down to that limit. So there's a number of different very rudimentary ways. So if you're at 53% CBD and you're at, I'll make up 2% THC. So through the process, it just happens. It's chemistry. It just happens. And so now you want to have a way of you want to get rid of the THC, but what you're going to do is you're going to sacrifice some of your CBD. So your 48% is going to go down to 44. Your 2% is going to go down to, less than the 0.3. But so now somewhere in the contract, you have to be able to say that if you have to go back through and get rid of my THC and you're sacrificing some of my CBD, what's that price model look like? So somewhere in the contract, you have to be able to say, when I get this back, I want to have this amount of CBD based on what I'm providing you for a plant.
Are you putting something into like what's the, if the CBD is 40% in our case study and the THC is 4%, which is way above the 0.3%, what's the third ingredient that's being added in to dilute everything else?
So not so much a dilution, but more of an absorption of both. So when you have your water filter on your sink in the kitchen, and you're using that also for your drinking water, well, you're collecting all the pesticides and the other things that are in there. You're collecting everything, So the same thing would happen here, whether you're using diatomaceous earth, a combination of diatomaceous earth and carbon black, whatever that concentration is and whatever temperature that's at, you can absorb both the CBD and the THC, but you're going to absorb everything else too. Everyone else is going to be in there. So if your goal is to get to no THC, then you're going to compromise the rest of the entourage effect because you're only going to get the CBD.
So you're not adding something, you're sending it through some sort of filtration to pull things out.
Yes.
Ideally only THC, but we know other stuff's going to be pulled out too. Yeah. So you're pulling more THC out than, for example, the CBD until you've gotten the THC down to 0.3, but you've lost a whole bunch of other stuff.
You have.
Basically the filter now has it, or the sponge, or the charcoal, or
it does. So now
DE.
somewhere in a contract, you have to know that those things can happen. Right. They will happen. So now in that contract, I would put in some sort of clause that says that if you have to do this, what else am I losing that I don't want to have just an isolate? I want to have something with the other components in it.
Right. Okay.
So if you're doing that, if you're doing supercritical fluid chromatography, so instead of supercritical...
I often do that. But keep going. Continue.
So if I go back through, what that will do is supercritical fluid chromatography will separate out the THC. You can take the THC out and keep all the CBD and all the friends in there because you're just taking one component out very specifically.
Okay, so that's a method. So if in our example we're above the THC allowed limit, that's another way to do it and you only take out the THC and you don't lose anything else.
Yes.
But it is, since you started by describing another methodology, is the implication that this is a much more expensive way to do it, or?
Yes, so your capital expenditure is much higher.
So most people don't have what was the machine?
Supercritical fluid chromatography.
They don't have those machines lying around?
No, they don't.
Okay.
And there's other ways to do it. I'll hear the centrifugal partition. I'll see countercurrent, but both the countercurrents better.
Well, actually, just quickly, would a question to this extraction facility, a good question be, do you have one of those machines on site? Because if they do, it means they can resolve this problem much easier than if they don't have that machine.
Right. Or through a contract say, I don't care how you extract, I don't care if my THC goes up because you're gonna take it out anyhow. Right. So I don't care what you do as long as you give me back CBD and all my friends.
0.3% THC or less. Okay.
Yeah, and all my friends. So some people will make an isolate and then it doesn't matter because they're going to get pure material, but you're going to still want to, as I'm thinking out loud, you're still going to want to know I came in with 20% of cherry wine. Great product. I have all my terpenes. Those are the ones I want. And I want you to give me back, my terpenes at this ratio with an acceptable amount of loss with no THC. Well, that's a different criteria. You've got to be able to match that criteria. So set up that contract on what you want. And I would think that most extractors on the refineries, the local refineries, will be fine with saying, okay, I can't do that. I'm doing it this way. I can't give you that. Go to another one.
Right. And that's why it's important to ask those questions, so you get that kind of honest feedback and answer. Because
you can't assume that they're just going to give you everything back. You have to have some allowable loss. You have to have some allowable chemistry going on. if you don't have that, I tell people that if you start off with, even internally, that you're going to lose 30%. Even on a good day, if it's 20% that you're starting off with, you're not getting 20% of the concentrate. 30% goes somewhere. You're losing it all the way through the process.
Got it.
Expected. You have to have expectations that are reasonable for your investors.
Right.
Because if they think it's 20, most people on the investment side are well schooled on economy. They are not well schooled on extraction, nor will they.
Right. So, all right. So now I want to. So we've that was like my hemp conversation.
Yeah.
We obviously touched on other stuff. Now I want to get just right into old school cannabis extraction.
Yes. Love it.
Let's get ready.
Yeah.
With extraction, you have basically come up with a new. What was not methodology, but process?
Yeah, I say call it more process.
More a process. So can you talk about that process, and then talk about, you have kind of the showroom of extraction types up in Oakland. So can you give me walk me through, customer comes in and they want to do X, let's bring you over to the alcohol extraction machine. Next customer comes in, wants to do something different, that's more appropriate for the CO2 extraction machine.
Yes.
So let's start with the new process.
Okay. So on the new process, it's a technology that's been used in the hops industry now for the last 4 or 5 years. So a lot of people in the hops industry are moving from the CO2, which is slower, more selective, to the technology that allows them to do it quicker. So almost all, I'll say well over 100 now, different brewers or hops manufacturers are using the technology, all the way from the craft beer up to the larger beer manufacturers. And so what happens with that is you're trying to have it not have all the acids and the bitters, and so this technology, what it does is it allows it to break apart the hops, and at the same time reduce some of the alpha and beta acids. So then you bring it towards cannabis. And so on cannabis side, an extraction means that a solvent goes into the trichome. You take the material, it's soluble, and it moves outside the trichome and then moves on its way. So the first part is thermodynamics. It's a solubility, it's a temperature, it's a type of solvent, and what it will grab. So much like making a tea. So if I get a tea bag and I put it in with ice, there's not a lot of extraction that's happening. If I put as I increase the temperature of the water, it allows me to get more components out. So that's how that
in a shorter period of time.
In a shorter period of time. And so when I'm looking at the cavitation, what it does is it does two things. Number one, with the modulated cavitation, so not a shearing motor or ultrasound, on both of those, everything gets torn apart. Everything gets, through sound waves, everything gets burst. But when you're looking at the modulated one, it's a way of bursting the trichome without bursting the plant cell wall. So now I'm not getting a lot of the other components that are sitting in the plant
chlorophyll,
cell, like chlorophyll and all of her friends. And so what happens is I go back through with the trichome. It's like breaking open an egg, and now it's open to the mass transfer of just moving along. So another analogy. So if I'm doing extraction and I'm trying to get the dog out of the house, I got to go into the house, find the dog, bring the dog back out. If the dog's in the front yard, it's a lot easier to bring the dog. And so when I'm bursting the trichome, the dog is out in the front yard. It's free for me to find. So when it's moving through that process, if I'm using water, the cannabinoids are not soluble in water, they're nonpolar. So now using water as my media, it allows me to burst open the trichomes, the material is free, and then I have biomass, water, and the nonpolars, the cannabinoids. Then I go through a horizontal decanting centrifuge, which means I'm spinning it through, the biomass drops out, and now I'm just left with the oil and the water. So my oil and water, now I have to get rid of all the other small things that we can't see, the fines, and so I go through a disc stack at centrifuge, and therefore I'm able to get rid of the fines. And then my last part is just a tri-phase decanter, which is common in the petroleum industry, the olive oil, all these other things. And so now what that does is that separates the water from the oil. So what I'm left now with is everything that was open from the trichome in the oil. So what I've done is it's not an extraction, it's actually solventless, because I'm only using the water as a solvent. One more analogy, sorry. So
That's
I go
okay.
back through. So my analogy on that is I have waves. The waves come in. It's a beautiful time on the beach. The kids are playing. They got their sand castles. Everything's
You're
wonderful.
painting a good picture in my head.
Very
right now.
nice. So then I raise the waves. I take out the sand castles. Kids are crying. Time for a nap. So now I can re-increase that. Or if I'm a hurricane, I have different style hurricanes where I can take out the first row of all the beach houses. Or if I'm a tsunami, I can take out the next mile and a half.
So it's almost like you can create a more violent extraction sort of process.
Yes.
So tell me, when do you want to use the gentle waves versus the
More
tsunami
aggressive,
waves?
The tsunami. So I can use the same technology and take the biomass. So let's say the first time I take out the sand castles. Okay, that's good. I can take out, that's my trichomes. I take out the sand castles, but I'm leaving the houses okay. So there's scanning electron microscope that shows that I am doing what I said I'm going to do. The second part is now that I've done that, and let's say I've gotten my cannabinoids and everything's wonderful. So now I want to raise it. What if I want to take that biomass, bring it back through, be more aggressive, break open the carbohydrates, the polysaccharides, and now if I wanted to, or through the second means, you could make biofuel. You could make hempcrete. You can take the same thing and beat it up more, and then I can come back around, do the tsunami, and then provide that as a biomass that can go back onto the farmer's land. So
Okay, I'm liking this. So with this one machine,
Yeah.
we can do a couple passes. First pass is the delicate pass that gets out all the essentially stuff that the cannabis industry wants, which is the oils.
Right.
Second pass, I think, gets to kind of, I feel like the disconnect in the market right now is, with hemp coming on the scene, and you think of hemp-based biomaterials, nobody really has the infrastructure to get hemp to concrete, or like the infrastructure is not there. But you're saying with this machine, and also people are growing varietals that maybe they're only doing oil extraction and then just tossing the rest of the biomass. And you're saying we could basically, it's almost like how the Native Americans would kill an animal and use every part of it.
Yes.
Whereas we kill an animal and we just use a little part of it and throw the rest away. Extraction number 1 is for the oil. Extraction number 2 could be for hemp, concrete, and biofuel.
Yeah, sure. Just like you get soy and corn.
Okay. And then extraction 3 could be
Making sure it's totally clean.
back to basically turn it into compost.
Yeah, or put it back on the land. So I don't know if it would be compost or not, but yeah, put it back on the land. It could be compost.
Okay.
So I see a way. So that I've noticed there's a few companies out there that are taking people's waste and then making it into hempcrete through other technologies. There's other ways to make hempcrete, whether it's through acid or whether it's through shearing motors or whatever. So there's other ways to do it, but I'm finding that the big hole in this industry is if you grow 7,000 acres of hemp and you only take that 10-15% of the oil and throw
You're leaving
the
a
rest
lot behind, right?
throw the rest away. What are you doing with all that waste? Where's that waste going in our United States? And if we could use it for everything else, use it for something else along the way.
So one of the things we talked about before was, like, depending on what the person's end goal is, you'd use a different process and technology and extraction solvent. What would, so you could, let's say ethanol would be the best process for whatever the person wants to make as an end product. So you could do like an ethanol extraction, but then throw all the biomass back into, what are we calling this?
So it's Shockwave, but it's part of
Shockwave?
Clean Wave. Yeah, Shockwave was the original one, but we're calling it Clean Wave in this respect.
But am I thinking about this correctly? Like you could do ethanol extraction as a first pass and then throw it into the Clean Wave extraction unit?
It's even better.
Okay.
I can use the ethanol as a solvent and put it through the Shockwave, so rather than doing any soaking at all, it's just going through as fast as the ethanol. So I made up a new word for that. So the first part is it's a separation. So it is non-solvent on the water side. So, but that's a separation because you're not using any solvent. The same thing can be done with ethanol as it's going through the process, but you break open the trichome, so you're never doing a soaking step. You don't do a soaking step. It just goes straight through. So I call that, a separation plus an extraction. So that's a separaction.
Clever. but point being, we don't need to use two different machines here. It can all be done in the shockwave / clean wave extraction unit. So as you see kind of like extraction, the evolution of extraction equipment, is this like, are the Eden Labs of the world going to be building these types of machines, or?
Well, I have exclusive patents, so.
Okay. But you said this has been done in the hops space.
Yes, so there's separate patents for hops versus a separate patent for cannabis.
So you took something that you were seeing in the hops space, applied it to cannabis, and filed the patent on that.
So I have exclusive rights to a patent from a company that allows them to do that.
Oh, so someone else owns the patent, and you have the exclusivity in the cannabis space.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So, but then would you license that out to other people to build the equipment you need, or do you want to be building the equipment as well?
So I'd be building the equipment as well, but I would be doing more of a leasing model to have other people take advantage of the same thing, because there's so many places that outsourcing is critical, and the people that are growing should be growing. Farmers know how to grow, but extraction isn't what they're doing. So if I have someone as a dairy farm, then they're providing the milk from the cow, but then the cows can be used for yogurt, it can be used for cream, it can be used for ice cream, it can be used for a lot of other things. So you just want to be the refinery for the dairy industry.
Right. So it seems like this is revolutionary, or at least evolutionary.
I would say to me, it's evolutionary.
Okay.
Because it's disruptive, but it's only because people haven't thought about this one way of doing it for the cannabis industry. And there was no reason really to do it before, because there wasn't enough material. And the hemp industry now
changed all that.
All that.
So the sheer scale of the introduction of hemp to the processing landscape is changing things so that it looks and smells more like hops, which is produced on, however many Budweisers are sold in the world, you need that much hops to support it. Okay.
So I would say that they probably don't use that much oil, but on the same side.
Right.
And so on the same side, though, as I would look at that, is that now you also have the fabrication companies that are very used to making large skids with a single software interface that can be used for, you're using the same technology for making sure eggs don't have, microbials in it, or you're making sure that so it doesn't beat up the eggs enough so that the egg whites turn into scrambled eggs. You're just making sure that it's cavitation enough. And so I'm using the same sort of technology. So when I use water, I'm having to have a stronger wave. So I should say more that my ethanol with the cavitation would be more like taking out the sandcastles. My water means I'm having to go up a little further and take out the houses.
Right.
Because I need a little bit more energy to break it up, because ethanol really is an extraction, and so it's aided in that. The ethanol already swells up a lot of the trichomes. Steam works because it bursts the trichomes, and then you release the material. It's not actually doing an extraction. Steam isn't doing an extraction. Hot air is not doing it. It's bursting trichomes. So this is another way of making the material more available for the process.
Got it. Okay. Mold, mildew, pathogens, how do you make sure your water is clean as an input into this process?
Well, one way or the other, the water is going to pick up things that are water soluble. And so anything that's water soluble is going to be in the water layer. Anything that's non-polar is going to be outside the water layer. So having that separation there, if I'm separating out the water, then I'm not going to get it into the oil anyhow.
I think the other question would be, if there's mold and mildew on the cannabis, is there a way to remediate that into the final oil product?
So when you're looking at...
Meaning you don't have that in the final product.
Right. So if you have that, if it's insoluble in water, if it's soluble in water, it's going to stay in the water layer. If it's a size thing, because those are organisms, then you're going to pick them up in your filtration step.
But I assume a lot of people in the history of cannabis have had moldy weed and run it through
Shocking.
extraction. And is there a way to, I know we don't want to highlight it as something to do, but like, can you take moldy weed and extract it and have no mold in the end product?
So the way I would
Or
do that
powdery
is,
mildewy weed.
yeah.
Or,
So what I would do is during that process, the final step of the oil, I would make sure the oil is now going through a process, a post-process, if you wanted to take out those components. So if I was if I doing it by supercritical fluid chromatography, it's not going to last through that, because you're going to do the separation. You're going to only pull out what you want, and that's not going to go through that process. So I think there's different steps that allow you to be able to make sure that you're always making something in the final product that's safe for the consumer, but also safe for the people that are working on the instrument.
well, let me say it differently. Instead
Okay.
of like a scenario where we have ungodly amounts of mold and mildew, farmers will have a little bit of those things on their crops, and it's not bad. I think regulations kind of say you're not allowed to have any of this, any of that, but at least through extraction you can make sure there's zero of it versus in flower form.
Yes.
Okay, got it. All right.
So the other part that I would say is that it's the other parts of the water that are, besides the pathogens, that are more concerning, like what's your ionic strength? What's your pH? Are you in Midland, Texas? Or are you in Ashland?
Asheville.
Oregon?
I was going to say North Carolina.
Yeah,
but,
I could say Asheville, North Carolina, because that's still there. And so now you have a very different water in Asheville than you have in Medford, Oregon, or you have in Tacoma, Washington, or Yakima. Just keep naming them. So you want to make sure that when you have the consistency on that, you're going to have to make sure that your pre-processing allows you to have that window of acceptability of what the water would be. Same way I have a window of acceptability of ethanol. So when I'm doing ethanol, my first pass on ethanol, even if it's 99%, I'm bringing it back around for my second pass. Now I have 95%. I bring it around the third pass, I got 90. So you not only have temperature of ethanol, but you also have that you're changing that ethanol each time it comes around, because it's picking up moisture.
Right.
So the reason I thought this technology was exciting and why I became more and more enamored with it and picked up the exclusive license for it was because I'm using wet plant. I'm getting as close to the plant when you harvest it that I can. And that way I have a maximum amount of all the compounds that are in that plant at time T.
Yeah.
Because right now I do time T and I dry it while I'm losing this. I move it across, I'm losing that. I'm just trying to get as close to the plant as possible. And then maybe that's not significant. Maybe it is, but at least at some point in time I have everything that started off there. And then, if people need to take out other things or they find more parts that are more advantageous than others, that's fine too. But I'm starting off with something as close to the plant, or I can take a dry. It doesn't matter where the process is when I'm putting into it. I have to make it acceptable for the process. So if it's a dry plant, I got to hydrate it. I'm going to put it in a big 250-gallon stir with a great big stir, and I'm just going to make sure it's hydrated so it has water all the way back through it. And then I'm going to do a processing.
So in that scenario, there's almost no reason somebody would send it through a drying process in advance of sending it to you.
Well, the only reason would be is if they were very remote and they wanted to carry it across large distances, and they didn't have a freezer truck, and they didn't fresh frozen or lyophilize it or something like that. So whatever you have on that side, because I think that's as it grows, having the refinery closer and closer to the farm. Now, for me, is this something that's reality? Is CBD so amazing along the way that we're not going to find other plants, or we're not going to find other things that move through? Maybe it pops in 3 years, and you don't want 6,000 refineries sitting out there that are vacant.
So that you mentioned fresh frozen. Can you because fresh frozen seems to be gaining market share. So can you talk about it?
In a more specific way?
What are you seeing? Like, are you involved in fresh frozen processing at all?
I'm involved in, yes.
Okay.
So the quick answer is yes. So people who have wanted to take part of their crop and experiment with fresh frozen. I'm finding most people won't take the entire crop for fresh frozen. They'll take a little bit and say, I don't know, does this work or not work? Put it in a freezer, and that's where it sits. So a lot of my work now, I've already done the dry work. There's plenty of dry material. I've figured out that one. That went pretty quickly. But now the fresh frozen, how do you get it so you make sure that you get it down to a 1/4 inch size, so through a grinding process it doesn't stall up because it's wet. And those things are readily available out in the industry. We're just repurposing them for cannabis, and therefore that's how I do my process. Flow stream them together, 1/4 inch size, keep moving. But the dry, how long do you dry it? How long do I stir it? And then bring it through the same process. So both of those are the same there. It's just the pre-processing's a little bit different. I will say one more thing. Sorry. And so
on fresh frozen or on something else? Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, so I was just wrapping up fresh frozen. Like, what are you? I mean, it seems like something you said people allocate a part of their crop, but it seems like that's a trend that's gonna continue, right? To expand.
I don't know.
And that it may not, but from a processing standpoint, is it just in that pre-processing that for you there's any difference, and then it just becomes the same as anything else you're handling? Or?
Just the same as anything else.
Okay.
Except for the ingredients that are in it. The compounds that you're going to get from fresh frozen are different from the ones that I see from the dry.
And what are those compounds?
Certainly, when you're drying them out, if you're not capturing the terpenes, you're losing 62% of your terpenes just through the drying process, right. Especially the more volatile ones. You're changing some of the plant dynamics. The plant is still living, by the way. I mean, you're still getting acetone, you're still getting pyrethrin, because you get it from chrysanthemums, but cannabis makes pyrethrins as its own protection.
Right.
So you have all those different parts that are in there. You also have a concentration of your acids. So you have a lot more of the acids, and I don't know if it's a trend or whether it's different, but you're seeing a lot more of the CBGA, and then so
in fresh frozen, post-processed material. Then okay,
it changes.
Well, so that's interesting. So it seems like that's one of the reasons why people are doing fresh frozen, is to capture as much of what was in the plant on its very last day alive as possible.
Yes.
And you're, from a processing standpoint, seeing that actually scientifically. Like, that is factually accurate.
It is.
You are seeing more cannabinoids, more variety of cannabinoids and terpenes that we're not losing because it's being dried first.
Or and the time that it's gone through that process. So time is not only the drying, but from time T, it's changing. So I find that also. Yeah. So now to go back through and support it through, LCMS, high technology stuff to show what the differences are. And are they important or not? They're just different. I don't know if they're important or not. Because we can't do all that medical research in the United States because it's federally legal.
Right. Which is a whole nother conversation.
It's a whole other conversation.
You were going to make one last point on something that wasn't fresh frozen?
Probably wasn't the one last point, but as I go back through and I see I can use the same device for making microemulsions. So once I have the oil, I can, whatever the solvent is, let's say it's water, I can make a microemulsion. So when people talk
Meaning like nano size?
Well, micro, so not nano size, because a nano emulsion, most of the time what people do is and I don't know what the actual specifications are, but it's based on size and whether you can call it nano or micro. It's a size issue.
So it's a size up from nano.
Yes.
Okay.
And so when I'm looking at that, it's a matter of there are no water-soluble cannabinoids. That can't happen. So they talk about water-soluble, but it's actually just emulsions, so you can't tell that it's not mixed. It's just that they're so small that it looks like it's dissolved. The second part on that one is, even though it looks like you can still see through it, there's other scientific ways of seeing whether it really is, still in there or is clung to the side of the glass or whatever container. Blah. So you can use the same technology where I go back through the oil and water, and I can go back through and make microemulsions out of the same technology. So I can use it for the first part of doing the extraction, call it extraction for lack of a better word. And so, but then I can also use it after I've done the field. Now I can make other products. I can use it for emulsifying a lotion, for emulsifying an ointment, for emulsifying a tincture. So you can use the technology not just on the first part. So that was the other part that made me interested in it and where I found it.
And so basically the concept of emulsifying are we emulsifying the oil?
Yes.
Okay, and
In the
then
water.
that's making everything smaller. So is the point there that it becomes more bioavailable?
It's possible to be bioavailable, but you might take that same emulsion and put it in a liposomal or a micellular. So you can add surfactants or other part that depends on what people want to have for their final product again. But you can put it in with, tween and twain and all these other surfactants that are already being used in all of our other foods and our salad dressings.
Got it.
Doesn't matter what it is. You're just
Okay.
trying to make it. Content uniformity is key. You want to have everything exactly the same.
So part of why you would emulsify the oil as a final step is to have uniformity of distribution of all the cannabinoids and terpenes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that if I'm like squirting it into vape tanks, that every tank gets the same mixture of
Yes.
full spectrum plant goodness.
Then you got to make sure from batch to batch. So that one batch may be contents, and that brings in a whole nother thing of inline testing and things like that.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, John,
Oh.
we will continue the conversation up in Oakland.
Yes.
All right.
Appreciate it.